Hey everybody, good to be back with you. So I thought we'd talk about a natal aspect today. This was a much requested video. I did the square between Mars and Saturn a while ago, and I've had a lot of requests for the opposition, so here we go. So when we're dealing with Mars and Saturn, it's important to understand that they're naturally square to each other because they rule square signs. So planets that are square to each other, squaring off, and then come into an opposition are already in a conflict that then results in a dramatic confrontation. And that's what all oppositions imply, is confrontation. So when we have Mars-Saturn in a hard aspect, we are learning about our relationship with humility and mastery. The hard aspects, including the conjunction, can show a lack of humility for different reasons, depending on what the aspect is. With the conjunction, we have an assumption of authority and a general natural lack of humility. With the square, we have a chronic problem with feeling humiliated and then in turn humiliating others. And with the opposition, we're going to swing from one pole to the other. Sometimes we're filled with humility, and other times we're feeling humiliated or humiliating others. So the ego and the image are very vulnerable when we have hard aspects between Mars and Saturn. The in conjunction and the opposition are probably, and the semi-square, are probably the hardest aspects to deal with. When we have the hard aspects between Mars and Saturn, it presents us with a problem of a lack of a confident ego and a lack of a confident self-image and an idea of mastery within our own selves. So this problem really leads to seeking a solution through supremacy, through seeking proof of one's supremacy. Because all aspects is a personal mythology. They're just problems that stem from our thinking, from our beliefs, from our ideas about ourselves and about the world. So when we have this opposition, we're going to see behaviors stemming from it. They're going to include an overcompensation or externalizing rage, having a fearful, projected paranoia, often a humiliating ourselves or other people, projecting potency to cover for impotency. There's a core wound of unworthiness that is the source of a hard aspect between Mars and Saturn. We have the archetype of the soldier, which is Mars, and the general, which is Saturn, at war when we have the opposition. We have the son challenging the father. The personal image is challenging the state, Saturn. So this war either results in a freedom from fighting or a supremacy through fighting. Because it's an opposition, we're going to experience both sides until we come to equanimity, until we work it out. So oppositions and in conjunctions lead to inconsistency within a personality. Mars is our timing, our survival skills, and our timing in sexuality and defense and in war. And Saturn is our crafted image. What we determine very early on in life is the definition of success, how we will define ourselves. Saturn is our ideas about attainment and our ideas about how we will attain. So Saturn is basically the concretization of the ego and the identity, where we are inflexible due to a predetermination of ourselves that's really imposed on us, and that we will either continue or not continue, depending on how we take responsibility for our lives. So if we don't wake up and realize the cyclical pattern of things, how we are repeating the past, how we're repeating behaviors, how we're repeating outdated coping mechanisms, then we are keeping that programming going. We're keeping the Saturn limitations firmly in place. And Saturn is the symbol for establishment. When we have hard aspects between Mars and Saturn, we're going to poke at and challenge the establishment, challenge those that hold power, those that are themselves established, authority figures, and we try to find their weakness so we can usurp them. So seizing power from the establishment is a way to prove that they are stronger. The more hard aspects to Saturn from Saturn that we have to any personal planet, the more that we're going to feel like we have to strive, to fight, to push through, to achieve. The greater the belief in obstacles, and the more that we're going to feel blocked and like we have to block. So issues of authoritarianism will also be present when we have this particular opposition with the square as well. The easy aspects between Mars and Saturn bring an assumption of our authority. We assume power with the easy aspects to Saturn and with the conjunction. We struggle to assume power with the hard aspects to Saturn. And Saturn is our external answer to our internal need for security that we find at the opposing axis, the moon, because Saturn is the natural ruler of the 10th house on the natural wheel. So it's how we will reach out into the world, how we'll take action to respond to our security needs, our need to hedge against the unknown, to provide for uncertainties in our lives, to establish ourselves so we can feel like that internal need for security has been met and responded to by building something in our life. So it's the shell that we build around the moon, which is the crab, which is a shellless creature. So as a result of the mix of Mars and Saturn archetypes, the stop and the go, the aggressive and the holding back, as a result of this mix, we see counterphobic behavior in people who have the opposition. The counterphobic personality actively yet unconsciously seeks out people who play on their fears and they look for conditions or situations that really test their mettle in an effort to destroy them or to master them. So what they fight against is what or who produces feelings of anxiety within them. And the anxiety arises, and then they take action against it so they can overcome it. The image that men with this opposition often have of themselves is aggressive, and the image that women often have of themselves who have this opposition is often more of victim. The gender roles that we have adopted to define men and women have a really big effect on how this aspect manifests. Men identify with Mars. Women most often do not. There are some lesbian women, who have kind of an LPGA kind of vibe about them, that actively apply Mars to their lives, actively accept it and identify with it. But most women do not identify with the masculine principle. And so they will project that part of themselves onto their men or onto authority figures or onto bosses. So the signature of this aspect will show up pervasively but women are actively seeing it in their men or in their bosses, in their authority figures. Men are more seeing it in bosses and authority figures or other or people that they see as attained some kind of social success. So men who have this opposition tend to be more alpha male-ish, and women will seek out alpha males. So with the conjunction, we assume supremacy and assume our respect and survival. We don't question our own authority. With the opposition, we want to be the general. We want to be the authority and kill the existing general or authority off. So we are the general with the conjunction, and we see the general as the enemy at the opposition. So people with Mars opposing Saturn do not respect weakness in other people because it's something they do not tolerate in themselves or respect in themselves, and they're trying to rub it out within their own selves. Whatever seeks to control or shape them will trigger them. And the more someone or something threatens to change them to the degree that it might release them from the grip of their fears, there might be change, the more that they'll try to destroy them or act against them or act out against them. So very easily triggered by anything confining or any authority or any boss figure. And they don't take orders well, if at all. They don't cooperate well because that requires teamwork. And they're their own advocate, people who have this opposition. So they go it alone, and they don't expect help, and they don't work particularly well with others. Cooperation in itself can be very triggering. And people who are dealing with this opposition in their birth charts often felt rubbed out or squashed or humiliated as a child or threatened. Often they had to fight for their life. They felt that their existence was threatened, and they can be caught in a state of fight or flight, but they won't take kindly to hearing the flight part. They want to feel strong because they feel weak, and their weakness is the motivation for developing strength, as strength is something that they feel that they're lacking. So the dominant parent is typically the source of the pain. Saturn represents dominance and parents, and usually that's going to be the father. It's the parent in our minds that assume the dominating role. So unconsciously, somebody who has this opposition is trying to kill off that dominating parent, to subdue, to control that dominating parent. Establishment, government, bosses, experts are the triggering figures that we're going to react to the worst when we've got this going on. Occasionally you can see it being a sibling or someone who was close to the family that played the role of Saturn when we have this opposition, that they were the source of the fear or the humiliation or the pain. Even more rarely it can be like someone or a series of someones who claim some sort of supremacy over the person who has this opposition. So there was, abuse or a threat or bullying in one's background that really set the stage for this aspect. But typically it's going to come from the dominant parent. But you have to look at everything, because aspects are describing a pocket of the personality. I'm not describing someone's entire personality in any video that I make. I'm describing a sliver. So this is just a sliver of what someone's got going on. And there you could have other mitigating aspects They could have this coming through more passive signs, and that's going to have an effect. But if this is coming through more aggressive or masculine signs, then it's going to be more of an overt issue, that we could say, because Mars coming through a passive sign is going to go about getting its needs met, go about acting out through passive ways of behavior. So, as a result of the conditioning, when we have this opposition, people are going to be able to identify, and frequently will identify, enemies around them. People that they think threaten their survival, or are going to hem them in or control them in some way, or even, claim some supremacy over them. Those are the ones that, again, that they're going to be most triggered by, and they will seek to take them out first. And they often don't realize that they're making that first move. So it's an offense as a defense, and there's a combativeness that exists with people that have this opposition that gets other people's dander up. The character Curly from Of Mice and Men, the John Steinbeck novel, he's a really good example of how this opposition can show up in a personality and the kind of career and social consequences that it can cause. Because Saturn is the planet of consequences, and Mars is aggression. And we are dealing with a fearful aggressiveness before we really address this aspect, before we really figure it out and heal from the negativities that it can cause, and that we are actually causing, because the planets don't make us do anything. So we can benefit from the good stuff that can come from this opposition after we've mastered it. And that's what it's driving us to do, is to achieve a mastery. So Saturn is responsibility, and Mars is aggression. And so the lesson is to recognize and take responsibility for one's own aggression, for the way one uses their Martian energy. Taking responsibility is really that first step in a quest for self-mastery and to learning the art of war. You're not going to learn the art of war by going to war with this opposition. You're going to learn it by studying the martial artist and the Jedi within yourself. Tai Chi is very beneficial for anybody who has a hard aspect between Mars and Saturn, especially the square or the opposition. A lot of people who have the hard aspects, even the trine, you see that a lot in the conjunction between Mars and Saturn. They'll do the hard martial arts. And as long as the power is externalized, then we will always be preparing to fight it. We'll always be conditioning to fight it. And we'll be at war with what it is that is outside of ourselves. So that oscillation that exists when we have this opposition between penitence and abuse, sometimes being contrite and guilty and then reverting to anger or cruelty, what makes the difference is going to be how we trigger the defenses. So working on defense that is more liquid, that is not so stiff, that is not rooted in the past is really, really key. So people who have this opposition really resent being erased. It's the ultimate trigger. They do not like being ignored, but often they will be ignored because of their behavior. People will learn not to deal with people who have this opposition because they're seen as unmanageable, or in some cases even dangerous or difficult. And some people with this opposition can be dangerous, but you have to look at everything. Not everybody who has this is actually going to be physically dangerous to other people. If you have Saturn aspecting and Mars and or aspecting personal planets, especially Saturn, then it will increase the chances of menacing behavior in the personality. So being passed over or not receiving respect or acknowledgement in the professional sphere, because this is the Saturn stuff we're talking about. When someone that they view as a Saturn figure, an authority figure, someone who represents supremacy, triggers them, then that is going to become a crisis to prove themselves. Saturn envelops the survival instinct of Mars in self-doubt. And the psyche is giving somebody with this opposition the opportunity to master it through mastering their own demons. After they recognize those demons in others as their own. That's how oppositions work. We always have to come to understand that we're our own worst enemy. And we have to learn to sit with humiliation when we have this opposition. We have to learn to feel it, to allow it, because it is something that we are railing against and something that we're trying to extinguish. It's what we hate the most. And that allowance of humility is what's actually the balance to the roughness in the personality. So we have to accept that we deserve to live when we have this opposition. We don't need to prove anything. That proving, that rising up to prove, is in service to the parent, in service to the past, the person who hurt you, the source of the humiliation that we fight so hard against now. So we have to individuate by giving up the past, by giving up this coping mechanism that really results in self-punishment. We're playing both ends of the role, both the abusive parent and the abused child at different times when we have this particular opposition. So we have to recognize how we're externalizing fear and insecurity, take responsibility for it. And this is how we grow into a leader. This is how we grow into a master. This is what it takes to grow into a tender parent. People with this opposition seek to win, but will lose until they increase their tact. Tact is defined as adroitness and sensitivity in dealing with others or in difficult situations or with difficult issues. And developing tact ensures that one will develop the traits of a tactician. So your strategy for winning must include tact. Without tact, you can't get others to work with you. They'll work against you. They'll try to get rid of you. They'll fire you. They will not cooperate with you. They will not acknowledge your abilities. And a reputation for being difficult and sometimes obnoxious can turn into a reputation for adeptly handling others and working with others to your end. A soft structure prevents powerful attacks against you. Receive the force. Don't push against it. Use your structure, the Saturn, the image of yourself, to take the force. And this will help you to not be frightened by force, to withstand the punches. When we're rigid or inflexible, the force will push us off our balance and we'll be vulnerable to the next hit. So we have to become flexible like water. And with this opposition, we can deliver the force, but we can't take it. And there's a disappointment in our own strength and our own weakness. And judging ourselves as weak or strong is really the issue. Taking on that role of the judging parent. Holding ourselves to a standard that's really the result of the conditioning. It's not even our own standard. That's a repetition of the original abuse, the original trauma, the original humiliation that occurred, except now we're passing that on, we're keeping that going. So we take on the role of that dominating parent ourselves. And then we feel that we will experience consequences from that. And then that is what is the door to see it, to understand it. So this need to take others out, to take a threat out in order to earn that right to survive, to take care of that threat, to extinguish that threat. That's really just a psychological attempt to master a past traumatizing situation. So we have to extinguish that threat within ourselves. When we have this opposition, we're going to oscillate because it's an opposition from pole to pole. In this case, it's from potency to impotency. For men, this can be a very real physical thing. And for women, this oscillation between potency and impotency is going to show up in their men. The opposition between Mars and Saturn is really a pole-to-pole shift between offense and defense. And so we will unconsciously offend and then defend to justify the offense, and then it starts all over again. So they're relentless in their effort to be acknowledged for their strength. They just want you to approve of their abilities. And unconsciously, they're a slave to acceptance, a slave to the establishment, a slave to those they do not respect. And this is because the more we want something from someone, the more power they have over us. The minute we decide we want something from someone else, they have power over us. And in this case, it's respect and acknowledgement that we want so bad. Learning to behave in ways that result in respect, that earn respect, not forcing it away from other people. That's how we find that acceptance. That's how we find that approval. So forceful or uncooperative behavior is not going to result in the respect that you really deserve. You don't have to earn respect by playing tough or by proving. You don't have to earn the right to exist. You've always had it. And the person who held you down, the person who humiliated you, they can be the reason that you succeed. They have seeded you with the potential for self-mastery. The ultimate martial artist. You can join the Jedi if you choose. The Sith in training empower themselves through aggression. And they kill off the teacher. They kill off the master to rise to power. So the Sith and the master are in a struggle for power. They both want to own it. They don't want to share it. The Jedi share the power. They teach it openly to each other. They don't possess it. They don't keep their best secrets for themselves, as the Sith often do. They pass on their strongest talents, and their shared strength becomes their legacy. The murder of their oppressor, of their master, is not what they become known for. And until we deal with this opposition, character assassination is often something that will be a theme in our lives. We will see other people doing it to us, and we will be engaging in doing it to other people as well. We have to realize what character we're playing and strengthen our own character instead of looking for others, demanding that others strengthen theirs. So we play out the role of the aggressor when we have this opposition until we see it. And this aspect really mirrors the rise and the fall of an authoritarian. How they rise to power and hold on to power and then lose power. And the conscious image of oneself who has this opposition is that of one who's fighting against that type of authoritarian person. But we have to recognize that we have those authoritarian traits within us when we have this aspect. So you are the phantom menace until you confront it and absorb it, work with it. Don't resist it. Don't try to extinguish it. Move with it. And you will come to know your opponent so well because you will come to know yourself. And this is when we win every time. So both sides of the force in balance lead to an undivided power. We deal with the negative side of Mars and Saturn and come out victorious. And we deal with the negative side of all planets in hard aspect until we don't. You can become so stable by way of a learned flexibility and become a premium example for other people once you get down to the bottom of this aspect. Become a teacher of strength just by living your life, a living lesson. Just by existing, we impart wisdom through our countenance and our presence and our experience. But you have to release your attachment to the past. Release past patterns, release attachment to pain. It doesn't have to be the template for the future. Reach out with your receptive feelings and allow yourself to relax. The more you relax and flow and become like water, the more successful you will be. Bruce Lee had this opposition, and he is one that we look to as a model of self-control and self-respect, self-mastery, respect for others. He got the best out of what this opposition has to offer, and we know that by how he lived his life, his legacy, his reputation. Saturn. He balanced Mars and Saturn, so there was no division within himself. He saw the aggression for what it was, and he turned his attention to controlling the real enemy, himself. And he knew that he was lethal, but he was not dangerous because he knew himself. You can too. Open your eyes to the truth of what you are. It will set you free from being a slave to repetition. And this leads to individuation from the parents, from the past, from the state, and brings us into a new possibility, a new state of being. Mastery. So, I hope this brought some clarity and understanding to this very difficult and often complex opposition. I do private consultation. You can find me on the internet at truthandaspectastrology.com, Facebook, Instagram, other social media at Truth and Aspect Astrology. And I also offer a subscriber option to my website where I put out lots of exclusive videos, teaching videos, question and answer videos, live video chats in our private Facebook group. So if you want to be a part of that, check me out over at my website. And I will be back super soon with more super cool videos. Bye-bye.